What is one African belief that would surprise you if a child from a part of Africa living in a part of Africa has not yet learned or encountered? Here's two I would find very surprising. Our ancestors. What? Africans and their ancestors are like 5 and 6. Or respect your elders. You did not know. In this next episode of the World of African Ideas, African children get to discover more about what makes Africa so special.
Hello and welcome to my World of African Ideas. I'm so excited to see you once again. Thank you for always visiting Koko. As you know, in my World of African Ideas, I introduce you to great people, great places, great animals, great foods, great inventions, and best of all, great ideas to ever come out of Africa or that are connected with Africa. Are you excited to experience today's visit?
Yes, Koko.
Good, because I'm so eager and I've been looking forward to your coming. Now, as you know, in the World of African Ideas, I begin every visit with a game. Your visits are so special and I love to start it with my favorite game, which you all know by now. So today I have a question for you. Give me an African object, in Africa that starts with the letter G. Yes?
Gong.
Oh, I love that. But gongs are also native to Asia. In fact, a lot of Asian traditions use gongs to signal. Yes, exactly. Sorry? Guitar? We don't call our musical instruments guitars, so no. Even though we have similar stringed instruments. Yes. Goje! Yes, that's a famous African musical instrument. Now, my African object that I want to share with you today, it has been the subject of a lot of conflicts. It is the reason why many parts of Europe scrambled for Africa. Yes! Gold is a rare and precious mineral found in many parts of Africa. Underneath the soil of Africa lies vast and huge deposits of gold, and these are found in many modern states in Africa today. I shared with you on your last visit about the great Asantewa, Asantewa, the Queen Mother of the Ashanti Kingdom. And the Ashanti Kingdom is very reputable because one of the great reasons for its reputation is its vast display and possession of gold. The Ashantis culturally come out displayed in great gold ornaments because of the great deposit of gold on the land, the ancestral lands of the Ashantis, right? And we see it even in modern day Ashanti dressing, Ashanti, aesthetics, and Ashanti worldview. Gold plays a very important place in Ashanti tradition. Gold is also, a great commodity and a great measure of value in the world today, right? It is used as a means of exchange in many parts of the world, and many countries actually save external deposits, save a lot of their wealth in the form of gold bars. So gold is so critical because it never loses its value. Unlike many other precious, minerals and other things, gold never loses its value. That is why it is so sought after and coveted by nations all over the world. It can be found in Ghana, which in European era was often called the Gold Coast. It is found in many parts of West Africa. We have gold in Nigeria, in Ivory Coast, and extending even to the DRC, there's huge deposits of rare earth minerals, including gold and diamonds and many other great natural resources. So you are blessed to come from a continent that has an abundant resource in gold, a resource and a mineral that never loses its value.
Thank you for playing my favorite African game with me. Now let's find the remaining items in the game. What is an African vocation that starts with the letter G? Griot. A griot is a special West African historian, storyteller, poet, musician, and praise singer all in one, who acts as a living library for their community. Griots are masters of oral communication, which is an African tradition. They use music, songs, and tales to pass down history, genealogies, and traditions from generation to generation. Highly respected storytellers, griots ensure the community's history stays alive forever. Though existing under different names in various parts of Africa, griots were popular among the Wolof people in Senegal, some of whom could not read or write documents, and so depended on griots to learn about their culture. Do you know any griot near you?
Now, I have another important thing I love to do in the world of African ideas. Dolamu, can you tell me what that is? Well, I hope that out of the stories I share with you, ideas form in you, but exactly. I usually share with you an important story about a great person, a great hero, a great legend that did incredible things on the African continent. And I have one such story for you today. Today, I'm taking you all the way to the great realm of Ethiopia, all the way in the 1800s. Are you excited? I see the smiles busting out on your faces. Now, in the year 1844, a great child was born who would eventually be called Menelik II, the great emperor of Ethiopia. And I'm going to tell you all about this amazing emperor and why he is so relevant in Ethiopian and African history today. Now, in the period of the 1800s, Ethiopia was ruled by an emperor, but the land was very fractured. The regions were often contending against each other. There were regional lords who often fought against each other. Even though there was an emperor, there was often a lot of resistance. And so the emperor of the day, who was called Emperor Tewodros II, ruled Ethiopia with a hard and mighty fist. He ruled with a brutal hand. He was very brutal in his style of leadership. And he was very paranoid that all those different regional lords were after his title, that they would one day seek to dethrone him as emperor. So he was often attacking the regions and forcing submission. And one day, in the region of Shiwa, which was the southern province of Ethiopia, a child was born. He was named Saleh Meriam. And his father was the regional lord of the Shiwa kingdom, right? But he grew up in those turbulent times where every time there was resistance, the emperor would come and quell the resistance with an army. So times were very turbulent. At some point as a child, Emperor Tewodros invaded his region and destroyed all of them, fought all the warriors, and captured the young prince and took him away as a prisoner into his own palace. So from a very young age as a child, he was separated from his family, separated from the palace, separated from his people, and was raised as a captive in the emperor's palace. And you know how they treat captives? With scorn, like a slave. But he was very intelligent. And Emperor Tewodros saw this, so he allowed him to get an education. And so Saleh Meriam was educated in the emperor's palace. He was trained in diplomacy, he was trained in languages, he was trained in warfare, he was trained in many things that typical sons of kings would be trained in and gain exposure to. But he knew that he was not of this place, and he had his own region and his own kingdom, and so he never lost sight of that. At the age of 21, he escaped from the emperor's palace and found his way back to his own kingdom of Shiwa. But by the time he got there, his kingdom was devastated. Those raids had taken away all their warriors and their strong men to farm. The kingdom was divided. The nobles were fighting each other, and there was massive poverty in the land. So the young prince came back and reclaimed his rightful ownership of the throne. But he had to start rebuilding his kingdom from scratch again. Now he saw that if we rely only on farming, agriculture cannot take us anywhere. The position where they were located was very strategic for trade. So he entered into trade agreements with a lot of different foreign traders who would need to pass through Shiwa. That whenever they are passing through, that they would make payments, tributes, commissions would be made to the country of Shiwa for peaceful passage, for secure passage. And he also began to exchange goods and services with some of these traders. And that was how gradually he began to build the economy of Shiwa back using trade agreements and using expanding trade routes. He also began to study the military tactics. Remember, this was in the, I said, what period was this? The 1800s. By this time, remember, Europe was scrambling for Africa. Remember that Europe was trying to get a lot of Africa's natural resources and Africa's strong men to come and work on their plantations as free laborers, right? So Europe was partitioning Africa, and this area of this realm of Ethiopia was of interest to many countries in Europe also. So he began to study Europe, the way Europe was waging military attacks on African nations, how Europe was expanding its own empire, how Europe was conquering lands. He started studying Europe's own military tactics, warfare tactics, and their weaponry. And he saw that the traditional way in which Ethiopians fought was more inferior to the way that Europe was approaching warfare, that Europe was using more sophisticated firearms. And so gradually, this young man began to acquire firearms and store them up in his kingdom. He started buying European firearms, weapons, military weapons, and acquiring them. Now, at some point, Tewodros, remember, the emperor that was very paranoid, afraid that they were always coming, somebody was coming to attack him. He made a very terrible mistake. He kidnapped some British missionaries that came into his kingdom, and that annoyed Britain, away, far distant Britain, in their own shores when they heard that their missionaries had been kidnapped. They sent an artillery of soldiers, a whole battalion of soldiers were sent to fight Tewodros. Now when they came, they attacked his kingdom, where his capital, where his palace was. They attacked, they unseated him, they destroyed. Now Tewodros, rather than be captured by the British soldiers, committed suicide, killed himself. Yes, shocking. But you see, when he killed himself, a new emperor claimed the throne, Johannes IV. He claimed that he was the rightful ascendant to the throne. And he used his own military armies to suppress any persons that resisted his assumption of the throne. He made all of them submit to him, declared that they will submit to him, otherwise he will eliminate them with their army. So Menelik, or Salimeriam, right? By that time he was still Salimeriam, the regional lord of Shiwa kingdom. He was very strategic. If I refuse to submit to this new emperor, he will come and attack me and my kingdom and destroy all of us. But if I submit to him, I need to be strategic. How do I do it in a way that I also benefit? So he went to the king and agreed on terms. I will submit to you on the condition that you will allow me to govern my territory independently of, don't interfere with the way I govern my country. And also, you allow me to continue to build and control my own military. Now, Johannes IV looked at it. I better agree to this, because if not, that means these people will continue to resist me. So he agreed to the terms. So he became emperor, and Salimeriam continued to rule the Shiwa kingdom. But remember, he was studying the Europeans who were coming. The French, the Germans, the British. He was studying them. He was also trained in diplomacy. So instead of the traditional way that the other Ethiopian empires used to operate, where they would always fight them and confront them in warfare, he started trading with them. He was diplomatic. He studied them. He understood that, one of the ways to cause tension among them is to instigate quarrels among them. Whatever I know about you, I will use it against you when I'm discussing with with the British. So all the things he learned about them, he used it against them. So when he's trading with the Germans, he will expose the weaknesses of the British to the Germans. When he's trading with the British, he will expose the weaknesses of the Dutch to the, and so he manipulated them, and in the process, he continued to rise. His economy continued to grow. He was acquiring vast firearms. Now, at some point, King Johannes IV went to war with some forces from Sudan and was killed in battle. So again, the seat of the emperor became vacant once again, and different people began to claim the rightful ownership of the throne. Salemariam decided that was his moment. He immediately announced that he was the rightful new emperor of the throne, and he claimed the name of Menelik I. So he declared himself Menelik II. Now, Ethiopia is a very Orthodox Christian society. And yes, Orthodox Christian society. And they believe that the first ever emperor of Ethiopia, Menelik I, was the son of King Solomon in the Bible and the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba came from Ethiopia. So they believe that that son of the two, that the union between those two people gave birth to their first ever emperor. So by claiming that he came out of that lineage, he won the hearts of the Ethiopians. Mind you, he also had a very strong army, and the other regional lords feared that if they don't submit to his rulership, then his army was very strong and would conquer all of them. So that was how Salemariam became Menelik II, the emperor of Ethiopia. Now, as all of this was going on, Italy became very interested in Ethiopia. Before then, he had signed a treaty with Italy. That treaty was simply that Italy will be a middleman in trade relations with Ethiopia and other counterparts in Europe. But he did not know that the Italians were deceptive. And even though in his own language, they pretended that this is what they had agreed to, in their own language, they declared a different thing. And they took that treaty in their own language. In their own language, they declared that Menelik has agreed to come under the protectorate. That is, Ethiopia is now a colony of Italy. But he never agreed to that. He only agreed that Italy will act as middlemen. There will be interpreters and there will be middlemen in any trade transaction between Ethiopia and other countries in Europe. Italy now went back to Europe and told all the other European countries that Ethiopia is now their colony. When Menelik heard that, Menelik renounced that treaty and said, I'm not going to have anything to do with Italy any longer. But Italy was proud. They felt that if they agreed to just back away, they will lose their faith, they will lose dignity amongst their other European counterparts. And so they're going to teach this Menelik a lesson, that Europe is more superior to Africa. So they declared war on Emperor Menelik. Menelik did not panic. Remember, in all these years, he had been studying what? Europe, their military tactics, their military strategies. He had also been acquiring firearms. He had been building his own military also. He had been forging alliances with all the other regional lords. In fact, when he became emperor, to centralize his government, he made a lot of deals with all these other emperors because he was very diplomatic. Instead of the approach of Emperor Tewodros, who was always using brute force, he used political agreements. If you come under my empire, if you agree for me to be your emperor, I will give you this position. I will give you that position. So by making all these deals, a lot of these regional lords agreed to work and cooperate with him in one single union, and the empire became stronger, right? So when Italy declared war against Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik began to mobilize all the sons and daughters of Ethiopia, all the regional lords of Ethiopia. He began to remind them of their great ancestry, coming all the way from Menelik I, and that they must all rally together and come together in unity and face this common enemy. They must not allow this external country to come and conquer them and take over their land and take over their control. And so all the sons and daughters of Ethiopia, they agreed to fight as one army with King Menelik to what? To resist Italy's control and conquering of Ethiopia. Menelik raised an army of tens of thousands of soldiers, right? But Italy was very proud. Italy believed that they were more superior in technology. They understood warfare tactics. What is this small African country that dares to face off a European country. In fact, back in Europe, all the European countries were supporting Italy. They sent army, they sent their soldiers. Italy also went to other African countries where it had colonized and gathered soldiers from Eritrea and other people to also fight against Ethiopia in this their war, right? And so they approached Ethiopia. When they arrived, the first settlements, the first villages that they reached by the coast, they began to destroy, they fought, and they won, they were conquering. But Menelik did not panic. Remember, he had an army of tens of thousands of soldiers. He sent them to the hinterlands of Ethiopia, the highlands of Ethiopia, areas that the Italians don't understand the geography, the weather, the climate, right? So the Italians were feeling superior, they were feeling confident because they had already started defeating the villages that they were meeting at the, when you first come in contact, the people you meet at the beginning of the country. So they were already feeling proud, yes. And Europe was celebrating. Italian army defeats this soldier. Italian army conquers, Italian army, and they were announcing it in their newspapers, on their radios, and they were all feeling good and proud that these small, insignificant Africans, they were already defeating. But Menelik had stationed his army. And he had a vast, he understood supply chain. Because do you know what it is to feed an army of tens of thousands of soldiers? To keep them fed, to keep them to make sure that they have endless supply of essentials that they need. He made sure that he had a supply chain. His logistics chain was very solid. In fact, his wife, the Empress, was in charge of logistics. So they would use horses, donkeys, animals, and all kinds of, to transport supplies. They had a whole supply chain already established. Meanwhile, as the Italian soldiers were conquering the different armies or small battalions at the fringe parts, they were entering deeper and deeper into Ethiopia, a place that was unfamiliar to them, a place that was mountainous, a place that the weather they didn't recognize. So the soldiers were getting weaker, they were getting, more and more disorganized, they were getting more and more confused, supplies were not reaching them, right? They didn't know that their army was weakening. They didn't realize. But Menelik stationed his soldiers in a place called Adwa. And in 1896, a great battle occurred. Because by that time, the Italian soldiers had gotten to the point of Adwa. So, in the middle of the night, when they felt that the Ethiopian soldiers were sleeping, the Italian soldiers went to wage a surprise attack at the mountain of Adwa, to attack the Ethiopian soldiers and by the element of surprise and conquer them. But they grossly underestimated the wisdom of Menelik. By the time nighttime came, they couldn't understand. I told you, they were not familiar with the weather. They were not familiar with the mountainous terrain. When darkness came in Ethiopia, it was completely dark. So as the soldiers were advancing, they became scattered. They lost contact with their different regiments. So the different units began to split. So when daylight broke, they couldn't find. So this battalion A will not find battalion B. Battalion C will not find battalion D. And they were all scattered, and the regiment was broken. Secondly, their commanders, they were all disoriented. They didn't know they didn't have their supplies because some of the battalions that were carrying the supplies were not available. Everywhere was just disorganized. And they fell immediately into the arms of a ready, a well-prepared, a ferocious, and a committed Ethiopian army that immediately began to attack their defensive battalion, break into their defensive sides, scatter them, and with a serious level of unexpected warfare, the Ethiopian army attacked, overran, and conquered the Italian soldiers. Shocking. In the history of Africa, it was unheard of for an African army to overwhelm a European battalion that was far more superior in terms of firearms and had more numbers. But he took the advantage of patience, organizing his garrisons and his soldier battalions, and strategic instructions and commands. And that was how the Italian army fell to the Ethiopian army. And they defeated them in a very disgraceful way. Very soon, 2,000 soldiers had already fallen. The rest of the Italian army began to flee. They began to run, and the Ethiopian army soldiers began to chase after them. They captured so many of them. It is reported that over 7,000 either died, were wounded, or were captured in the Battle of Adwa, the famous Battle of Adwa. And for the first time in the whole of Africa, Europe was not able to defeat an African army. And that is how Menelik ensured that Ethiopia is the only African country that was never colonized. Because of his superior military capability, he resisted the forceful army of the Italians. And that became an example to other African countries because they now saw that it is all about preparation. If you prepare well, if you are strategic, if you combine military with diplomacy, with intelligence, with strategy, you will defeat these Europeans. They're not better than you. They're not more superior than you. It all takes preparation, the right kind of preparation. And soon, the confidence of other African nations began to grow again. And soon, those African nations began to press and push for their independence. And that was how a new wave of independence swept across the entire African continent. And very soon, even those African countries that were once colonized gained their independence from the colonizing masters, from the different European countries that had the audacity to come and conquer and suppress and oppress these different African nations. So we celebrate the life of Emperor Menelik II, because he proved to all of us that with the right kind of thinking, intelligent thinking, with the right kind of preparation, and with the right kind of strategy, you too can establish and take your prideful place in the Committee of Nations. Emperor Menelik did not just stop there. He went on to build Ethiopia into a modern nation. He had a lot of faults also, because even as a ruler, he continued to conquer the smaller Ethiopian tribes to bring them all into one central empire. And that caused some tensions internally. But he is credited as the emperor that withstood European conquest, ensured that Ethiopia was never colonized, and built Ethiopia into a modern nation that can also boast in the Committee of Nations as what? A unique and civilized part of the world. So that's a great story of a great king who once ruled in Africa. Any thoughts about great Emperor Menelik? Yes, Chimamanda.
I love the way Emperor Menelik, he decided that he wouldn't just try fighting the war. He used strategic ways, like he studied the Europeans. He went into deep parts of the forest and deep parts of Ethiopia that he knew that the Europeans would never understand. And the Italians, I noticed that they weren't they were proud. They thought that, they could just easily take over Ethiopia. They didn't have any special system for it.
Yes, very correct. Intelligent thinking. We must never just be spontaneous and reactionary. Don't just react in pride, in arrogance, in whatever it is. Always be thinking strategically and intelligently. Gather information, right? Don't rest on your oars. Build your weaknesses. Recognize your strengths and use your strengths. Study your enemy. Study your opponents. Don't just feel like you're lofty. Don't also rest on past glory. Continue to improve yourself. These are all lessons that we can take away from the life of Emperor Menelik II. And these are reasons why his empire was able to withstand and resist the European attack.
Next, what is a place in Africa that begins with the letter G? The Gulf of Guinea. The Gulf of Guinea is a giant, beautiful part of the Atlantic Ocean located on the west coast of Africa, where big rivers like the Niger meet the sea, and where the equator and the prime meridian cross. It is a key spot on the African continent, hosting several coastal cities, amazing beaches, fish, dolphins, and diverse sea animals. Not only is it great for fishing, but its waters are also important for boats and ships traveling all over the world, carrying goods. This geographic part of Africa is the home to countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and Angola, which are full of life and energy resources like oil and gas that help everyone around the world. When viewed on the map, the Gulf of Guinea stretches from countries like Liberia and Ghana down towards Gabon. What would happen if African countries prevented ships from passing through the Gulf of Guinea?
Attack. So let's move on to another part of this visit, which I love so much. It's that time again where I get to share an African proverb with you. This time we are visiting the country in East Africa called Uganda. And here is a very important proverb that Ugandans share and pass on amongst themselves as words of wisdom. They say, "The lazy man blames his poor harvest on witchcraft." The lazy man blames his poor harvest on witchcraft. Anyone care to? Yes, you want to say something? I love how Dolabo always wants to explain these proverbs to us. Yes.
Like, a poor man does not, like, what the thing is trying to say is that a poor man, he does not like to blame himself for, like, the wrongdoing, like, maybe he did something wrong or something did not go well. He will not blame himself, he will blame, like, something else.
Okay. Yes, Chimamanda.
Trying to say that, like what Dolamo said, he's trying to say that people can never, some people don't take responsibility, they always blame other things for their wrongdoing.
Okay. I think this one is closer to what you and Dolamo have shared, Chimamanda, and it's talking about, but it's not talking about a poor man, it's talking about a lazy man. There is a distinction, right? We're focusing on lazy people. And what it says is that oftentimes lazy people have a mindset, and the mindset is that, oh, I'm a victim of supernatural forces, or it is fate, or it is destiny. They never examine the role that they played in their laziness. That when a person does not bring home an harvest, those who are lazy, you will hear one single cry from them. They always say, "Is the fault or it is the witches? The witches have cursed me." That is the way of lazy people. Lazy people never want to own personal responsibility for the outcomes that they experience in life. They always want to blame it on natural forces or invisible forces. And that is why it's a cycle. So because it's invisible forces, they will never even work hard because they always almost already believe that they are victims, right? And also because they don't work hard, they are lazy, then this is the natural result that will come about. They will never have a harvest. So I think the lesson is we must always check our beliefs. The minute we start blaming things outside of us, the minute we have mindsets that excuse us from taking personal responsibility, we are in a dangerous place. We must always examine ourselves and the results that we are experiencing. What is our role? Did we work hard enough? Did we put in enough effort? If it's in your exams, don't have the attitude of, oh, it's not my fault. They just, the questions, the way they wrote the questions. Yes?
Some people might say, the teacher is targeting me.
Exactly. Somebody might say, it's the teacher who's targeting me. She wrote the questions in a way that I would never be able to understand it. Or they didn't give me enough time. Or there's always somebody else to blame except yourself. So it's not only in the sense of harvest from farmers or agriculture that we need to think about the application of this proverb. We need to think about it even in our lives. In what way are we excusing ourselves from personal responsibility? I think it's a very wise proverb from the people of Uganda, and that's probably why they are very hard working. Would you agree?
Next, what is an animal found in Africa that starts with the letter G? Giraffe. A giraffe is the tallest animal on land. A gentle giant that wanders across the African savannas. Its fur is covered in brown patches that look like pieces of a puzzle. Just like your fingerprints, no two giraffes have the exact same pattern. Giraffes can stand up to 5.5 meters tall, higher than 3 grown men standing on each other's shoulders. Their necks alone can be as long as a person is tall. Known as twiga in Swahili, in many African cultures, the giraffe represents foresight and wisdom because its height allows it to see both the past and the future by looking across the horizon. Have you ever seen a giraffe?
Finally! I have a role model that I want to introduce to you today. As you know, whenever you visit me, I share a great role model with you. So it's that time of the visit when I introduce to you a great role model. Do you know who this role model is? In Africa. Yes. Today, our role model is Aliko Dangote. Alhaji Aliko Dangote, a Nigerian businessman who grew Dangote Group, the company called Dangote Group, which has a lot of assets and a lot of holdings, cement businesses, sugar businesses, flour businesses, eventually becoming the richest black man, the richest African, right? But what is also significant is that Dangote is the owner and founder of the largest and the first private-owned refinery in all of Africa. As you know, many African countries are major producers of a great commodity in the world called crude oil. The world needs crude oil to have petrol or gas, fuel that powers industries, automobiles, and many aspects of our day-to-day lives. But very few countries are able to refine their crude oil. For the first time, a private individual built a private refinery, and his refinery happens to be the largest refinery in all of Africa, with the capacity to refine at least 650,000 barrels of crude oil daily. Whoa, I know, right? Yes, so that's why this man is very important. He sees opportunities, he seizes opportunities. He turns opportunities into business opportunities. He invests in ideas. He solves problems through businesses. And in the process, he has become wealthy. But the starting point is he solves problems through businesses. That's a great role model that we too can emulate. He doesn't run away from problems, but thinks about how to use a business idea to solve a problem. Alhaji Aliko Dangote is an example of a great businessman, entrepreneur, and industrialist for all African children in the world today. Thank you. We've come to the end of this exciting visit. I loved having you with me. Any final thoughts because we have to let you go? Yes? Yes, Alhaji Aliko Dangote is very much alive. He's often in the news, and maybe one day we might get a chance to visit him and have a chat with him. Would you like that?
Yes.
I would love that. Hopefully he watches our show and start putting together the kinds of questions you would ask him if you ever get a chance to visit him.
And finally, what is a food original to Africa that starts with the letter G? Groundnut soup. Groundnut soup, also known as peanut stew, is a rich, nutty, and savory dish popular across West Africa. The most important ingredient is groundnuts, also known as peanuts. They are roasted and blended into a smooth paste to make the soup thick and creamy, and mixed with various meats or fish and local spices and vegetables. The taste is a mix of rich, savory, and sometimes a little bit spicy or sweet. It is popularly eaten in Ghana and Nigeria and can be paired with fufu, eba, or other swallows. Would you like to eat some groundnut soup with me?
Thank you for coming to Koko's World of African Ideas. I enjoyed having you, and I hope you enjoyed having me too. Bye.
Thank you, Koko.